Welcome. We are so glad for you to join us today. My name is Joe Swimmer. I'm the Executive Director of the SEEP Network, and we're honored and pleased to be presenting this workshop on Archbishop Justin Welby's Reconciliation course, a wonderful program that has been put together and is being used both in the UK and in the United States. And so we look forward to a conversation with two of the practitioners in this program. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Kiera, and thank you all for joining us. And we look forward to the conversation with Kiera and Demarius. Thanks so much, Kiera.
Thanks, Joe. It's so lovely to be with you. Welcome from England. My name is Kiera Phyo, and I am in London. It's our evening, your afternoon. I am hoping that my children go to bed in a really quiet manner this evening for me to not interrupt us all. But it's totally wonderful to be with you. I work for Archbishop Justin Welby in his reconciliation ministry. I'm the director of the Reconciling Leaders Network, which has created this program that Joe referred to called Difference. And it's a real delight to be with you all and to connect and share, hopefully, some shared vision and passion for a just and flourishing world, and introduce you to difference. And I'm doing that with a great friend called Demarius, who will also now introduce himself.
Afternoon, dear siblings. I'm Demarius Walker. I'm also talking to you from London today, though I am one of you, so fear not. From the States, I'm from the Episcopal Diocese in Atlanta. I just graduated from Virginia Theological Seminary studying Christian formation, and I'm deeply passionate about peace building work, and so I'll go to Boston University in the fall to follow up on some of that work. So I look forward to this conversation and inviting you into this wonderful resource in the Difference course.
Thanks, Demarius. Now, I wonder what's made you arrive here this afternoon. And just to say, the chat function we will refer to and use and engage with. So if you even want to say hi or where you're from, or if you have questions that come up through this session, or even things that resonate or that feel different, we would love to hear them. So feel free to generously use the chat. Nathan is on it. Well done, Nathan. And as much as we're able to engage with, we'd love to. So do feel free to make that part of this session together. And I feel like I should also just come with a little kind of caveat of some of the context that we're talking about. I just really appreciate the differences and the nuances. And I sit here in London thinking about these things, but it gives me a certain perspective. And so some of the words that I use might sound different to the words that you would use, or there might be some kind of language nuances. And so also feel free to kind of engage with any of that. So yeah, just to say thank you for bearing with. I was even thinking about some of my spelling, and I was like, oh, I've got all my English spelling here and some of these things. But it's a real joy to be with you. And I'm just gonna open us up in a quick prayer. Lord, we thank you for this time. We thank you for this collection of people and all the people that are saying hi on chat and congratulating Demarius for graduating. We thank you that you're with us, even though we might not be able to see each other. We're not in one another's physical company. We know that you are with us. And Lord, we just choose to be present with you in this moment, knowing that you are present and your presence is with us, as we also choose to be present with each other and our wider context and circumstances and situations. When we're talking about engaging with difference and navigating divides, we know that we are in a complex, complicated and hurting world, Lord. And so we just ask that your spirit is here with us. We seek your courage, we seek your guidance, we seek your wisdom, we seek your hope. And we thank you that your grace is upon us and with us. In your good name, amen. So to just give you a little sense of structure, Demarius and I thought we would just talk a little bit about the context that we find ourselves in, why something like the difference course feels pertinent at this time, share with you Archbishop Justin Welby's vision and passion and priority for this. And after that, to then look a little bit at the kind of features of difference and what the course involves, what its kind of main offering is. And then in the kind of latter third, for Demarius and I just to talk about kind of a bit more frankly and candidly what it's been like to run it as people. I work for Archbishop Justin, so have been involved in creating it, but also have run it a number of times. So then for us just to talk a bit more as practitioners, some of the top tips we might have or some of the reflections that might be interesting for you if you were considering running the course in your own context. Wonderful. And I just wanted to start by reading John 1. It's something that has journeyed with me a lot as we've engaged with some of this subject matter. So John 1, well-known words, the Word became flesh. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, but the darkness didn't understand it. There came a man who was sent from God. His name was John. He came to witness and to testify. He himself was not the light. He came only as a witness to the light. The true light that gives light to every man was coming into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who received him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision or a husband's will, but born of God. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. And I wanted to start there because it's one of the things that really captivates me about following Jesus, is this God who became incarnate, known as Jesus of Nazareth. And when we're looking at the complexity and fracture and division in our society, I am inspired and challenged and almost mesmerized by the fact that God chose proximity with a broken, fractured world, that his restoration to the injustice and the division in our world looked like moving in, it looked like getting closer, it looked like stepping into the context in a totally new and reimagined way. And Jesus, God through Jesus made himself present with us. And that the divine, the heavenly became finite, human, fragile, is one of the things I find most amazing. It's in Christ's divinity that I am profoundly taken to worship. It's in Christ's humanity that I care to worship his divinity. I just love it. So I wanted to share that at the start. And so just one of the things thinking about that, I've spent the last year in a few conversations with a senior Aboriginal Christian leader in Australia called Pastor Ray Minikin. And he's talked to me about this kind of process of reconciliation. And he's said to me that it is often the discourse of the wounded who are always looking for reconciliation, and that it is on the initiation of those who are wounded who are seeking reconciliation. And Pastor Ray has kind of reflected that back to me as this ministry and nature of the character of God. It is a wounded God who we worship, a rejected God like we just read, not received, abandoned, betrayed. And that this ministry of restoration, renewal, is God's reconciling himself to us, as we see in 2 Corinthians, and he's given us this ministry of reconciliation. But this big picture is almost that it's his, this is his ministry. This is a God that leans into us, that bends in, this wounded healer, as Henry Nouwen says, and invites us to be caught up in the story of what God is doing in this world, and invites us to be caught up in God's ministry of reconciliation. This ancient call for a very present day. And here in the UK, like, we find ourselves as many do, in a really conflicted place. Archbishop Justin recently said that COVID has pulled the paper off the wall, and we see the cracks under the paper in a way that we have not seen in generations. That this pandemic is kind of, it's shaking us, and it's exposing a lot of, you know, systemic and structural challenges that feel very relevant to us in the UK, and that we need a reconciling presence at every level across society. And we've seen political attitudes becoming increasingly polarized. Disagreement pervades our relationships, our friends, our unit family, and we see some of these societal tensions growing, or things that have been very familiar to people becoming more familiar to people that maybe haven't understood it. This kind of new level of awareness or depth. And we've gone through Brexit as well. So just this kind of political identity that gets created with something like that. And this, you know, political, this reflection onto our own identities, whether that's Brexit or climate change or your view on migration. Identity politics is, you know, I guess, alive and well in many ways. And so just for us in this context, there's some of that big picture, but then there's also the reality that conflict is expected in any relationship, in my close relationships, as well as into those wider kind of systems and structures or community fractures that we're talking about. And often it can feel that we're kind of ill-equipped to sometimes respond constructively in those moments of division or difference that actually we face in our day-to-day. We maybe face them in our home, family, friends, at the school gate, in the park, in our churches, in our family meal times, all sorts of places. And how can we be equipped for that? And so that's really part of why we've created Difference, is for people to equip people in those moments, and recognizing that as people of faith, that we want our faith to have a positive impact in this world. We want it to make a difference. We want it to do something good. We want it to bring about the change that we're all hoping to see and longing for and believe is, you know, what God's kingdom coming is. But that can feel overwhelming, and sometimes a lot of us don't know where to begin, how to respond, or where to start. And so that's Archbishop Justin has created Difference as a way to equip people to navigate disagreement, cross divides, to think about forgiveness and how we can pursue engaging with difference in a new and reimagined ways. So that's a little bit about kind of what was carrying in me today as we meet together. Demarius, I'll pass over to you.
Well, dear family, I don't think I need to spend too long talking about the U.S. context. We know that we are in a very sort of dangerous time in a lot of ways. I mean, the culture wars are alive and well. We have seen the breaching of the Capitol. We see the rise in gun violence. We see the ways in which folks are fighting over basic rights that we thought were already guaranteed. We know we're in a place where we can't have conversations well in the country. Often while I'm here, when I introduce myself to people while I've been here in England, I often say that I'm from the divided states of America, or from the future former United States. Now, I hope that's not prophetic, right? But we know that it is hard for us in America to find any sense of unity or any common ground. We're in a dangerous place, and it will continue to get more and more dangerous if we don't find a way through. If we don't find a better way to engage with each other, to see each other as human. On all sides, sometimes we dehumanize folk. Sometimes, as I am a person who has spent a lot of time sort of fighting for justice, even folk who I've been in the trenches with sometimes will dehumanize. It's deeply hard, the place where we're in. But the thing that I love, Kiera, that you started off with that passage, and I love, one, I appreciate the vigor with which you read the Bible, and I know my Episcopalian siblings can appreciate that. But I recognize that we start from a different place as Christians, right? So we look out at the bleakness of the land, we look out at the divisions, we look out at the violence and the hatred, but we see something different. I was thinking about incarnation, and there are two ways to tell the story. And sometimes when I'm in my most cynical sort of state, the way we can tell the story of the incarnation is that love comes to the world and then we try to kill it. Yeah. That's one of the ways that we can tell the story of Christianity. But I love the rephrasing. Barbara Brown Taylor does this well when she says the actual story of incarnation is that God trusts flesh and blood to host divine love. God trusts us with love. And that's a different starting point. So as Christians, as followers of Christ, we have no reason to throw our hands up, because we know that God trusted us with this work. And we know, as followers of Christ, as people who are part of the Jesus movement, we have been given a very clear call to be reconcilers, to be peacemakers, to be vessels of love. And in the current context in the US, it's really hard to do that. But this is why I am really excited about this resource, about the difference course, about all the ways in which peace builders are trying to equip us as folks who are followers of Christ to step into our role. In this point in history, the curtain is drawn, and it's time for us to step into our role as followers of Christ. To recognize ourselves as children of God and to recognize others as children of God. And I think this is a part of what brings me to this work of peace building and this work of reconciliation, even though I know in some circles sometimes that can be a dirty word.
Thanks, Demarius. I want to share with you a recent film that we've just made of Archbishop Justin, and he's just setting a bit of the context. So it's a 6-minute film, and I'm gonna play it through screen share. I appreciate that I'm very far away, and I'm hoping internet doesn't make this too like jiggity and juggedy. I can, if it is, drop me a little note in the browser, and I can just send you the direct link to watch it in your own browser, and I can put that in the chat. But if you give me a moment, I will share this film with you. Okay, Demarius, if I got the right shot up, you can see it. Okay. And you can give me a thumbs up for sound too.
I'm Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and I believe with all my heart that reconciliation is the call on every human being. We all know we live in a world that is divided, conflicted, and hurting. And though many of us long for our faith to make a difference, it can be very hard to know where to start. It's part of the nature of being human to cause friction. Within ourselves, there's conflict. So many of us struggle with the conflict with bits of ourselves we don't like, or more seriously. Within families, there's often conflict. Part of being a family is learning to disagree well and still love one another. Within churches, the miracle of the church is not that like-minded people get on well, as a friend of mine once said. It's that by the power of God's Spirit, people who wouldn't normally be seen dead in the same place learn to love one another. But learn to love one another is the important bit. And then when we get out into wider society, of course, the whole issue in a democracy of politics is about managed conflict. And around the world, we see unmanaged conflict. We see conflict through greed and the exploitation of natural resources. We see war. We see immense cruelty, huge numbers of people fleeing from fighting or from suffering caused by fighting. And then there's the most global conflict of all, the conflict between human beings and their natural environment. And that brings so many questions to mind. Is being a Christian about turning up at church once a week, trying not to do the wrong thing at work or at home or whatever it is? You know, if you're in an office, don't nick the pencils and don't fill your expenses. Is that it? God has put us in this world to change it, to be different. And amidst suffering and amidst joy and with purpose, to be those who leave behind us a different and infinitely better landscape than the one we walk into when we're born. God has a problem. God's problem is he's not really that much of an economist. A lot of economics works on equivalence and exchange. You give something and you get something, and they've got to be more or less fair. God's economics works on lavish extravagance, ridiculous overabundance. We look around at the creation, look at the stars at night. We don't need all those stars, but somehow God, in his almost absurd over-giving, created this cosmos which is so extraordinarily beautiful, beyond anything we will ever fathom, however long we study it. And God is the same with us. His love is not just enough for us. The gift of reconciliation which we are given, the reconciliation we have with God through Jesus Christ, it's not just enough for us. It gives us reconciliation with God, but it gives us so much reconciliation that we can't possibly contain it. It's as though God was filling us not with a jug of reconciliation, but with a fire hose, with an ocean of reconciliation. And so the gift of reconciliation we receive overflows from us into the world around. We are to be the lavish givers of what we have received so lavishly. I think that's the most amazing thing, that the church is a peacemaker because it's received peace. We are reconcilers. The founder of Christianity didn't lead an army. He didn't found a kingdom of this world. Those in his kingdom don't have passports. There are no frontier guards, no barbed wire. There is a kingdom of love. And authentic Christianity is to be like Jesus, to be Jesus to the world today. So the role of faith, or Christian faith especially, is to be peacemakers. Jesus himself said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God." They'll be called the children of God because they show the family likeness. They build peace.
Thanks, Archbishop. So that's part of sort of a little film series we've done recently with Justin. It's separate to the course, but it's kind of just giving people some of the central themes of what the different course is about. And if you want to receive the full film series, I've just popped it in the chat. I'm really enjoying these conversations on the chat. So if you want to receive, there's about 5 films, they're just short like that. You can sign up to our mailing list, and that will kind of introduce you to what Difference is about, including this film series. So feel free to do that at any point. And I think some of even what Archbishop Justin refers to there, I think, is the complexity of it and is the challenge of it. And we recognize that, and Demarius talked about that at the start as well, like the role of justice when you're looking for reconciliation, what you do with practicing forgiveness if someone isn't sorry. Like there's so much that goes on in this kind of ministry or process. And Justin has some of his own really challenging stories that he speaks to at times about that as well. But also, says that actually it's very rare that full reconciliation happens. Even that passage in Revelation where it talks about everyone, all tribes and tongues and everyone is this big ultimate hope, and full reconciliation might not happen, but the journey is a journey. It's a process. It's not an event. And even if we don't get all the way there, getting some of the way is good and is important. Someone said I'll come back to that with the chat. And I think what Difference tries to do really well is that it's not a get a bigger action plan. It's not we need a big to-do list. It's not trying to present a one-size-fits-all action plan that will heal all the divisions and bridge every divide, but instead it's focusing a bit more on formation, on character, on who we are, and the relationship between what we believe and what we do, and that there's a connection there, and it works around trying to create some open dynamic space to explore some of those ideas. And so what I like to think of is really the real offering of the Difference course. It's key learning. The thing that all the participants would take away after it is 3 habits. So to give just a little bit of a practical nature, it's a 5-session course, and those 5 sessions are interactive. There's a film, there's an encounter with Jesus to explore, there's an interactive activity, there's this time of sanctuary and prayer and reflection at the end. And I can tell you how to access all of this as well, but it's a course that you would run with your own group. We're not centrally running it. It's a resource for you in your own context, in your community, to run it with your church or your small groups or whatever kind of structure you have. And as I said, that central offering is 3 habits. So looking at actually how can we instill this a bit in our character, knowing that we need renewed ways of thinking, being, seeing, if we want to see some of this restoration and renewal that we're talking about. So I'm going to just talk about those 3 habits to give you a sense of what they are. I've got some pictures if that helps those that are more pictorially minded. So the first one is be curious. And this is about, one, knowing that everyone is made in the image of God. This is rooted in our Genesis story. And the importance on being story seekers, listening to the story that we don't know. And as we seek out stories, we also understand anew the limitations of our own story. And that helps expand us and helps us understand our perspective, and invites us to see the world, or try to see or understand it from someone else's perspective, from someone else's shoes. It's about being enriched by each other's stories. It's about questioning structures of power in society or in our own lives. It discovers those limitations of our own story. It's moving away from presumption and assumption into wonder and exploration. So that first habit is being curious. The second habit is being present. How can we encounter others with authenticity? We're not asking people necessarily to forget themselves in moments of difference or division, but to be able to bring their authentic self and to meet people as they are as well. And so in some of those really challenging spaces, how can we show up and stick around? How can we give that time and sometimes attention that's needed? How can we see the person beyond the issue that they might think or hold or have that we might wrestle or struggle with? So is there that possibility of even deepening some of those challenging relationships if that's handled well? In creating meaningful connections, so much that we may be able to move from hostility into the power of hospitality and the kind of space that might open up to cross dividing lines. So about being present, that beautiful idea of God incarnate. And then thirdly, reimagine, finding hope in the places that we long to see change. And we know that God is making all things new. He is restoring things to him, reconciling things to himself. And so how can we find almost even that hope or that belief to see beyond our prevailing narrative, to know that there could be something other than what surrounds us? And how do we embody some of that hope that we long to see? And I think with this one in particular, I mean, all are done well in community, but in particular, you know, we abound by our imaginations, and it is in community that we can have those imaginations stretched. Reimagining is rarely a solo experience and best done together. So those are the three habits that really form difference, and they're the core central teaching of the course. They're the things that people explore. And before I just hand over back to Demarius, just to say the context of that is there's 5 sessions. The first session is about God's call, so it's kind of that big picture, that overarching, this is we're invited to be peacemakers. It looks at that passage in the Beatitudes. So that sort of lays a premise. Then we look at crossing divides. How can we identify the walls from fear and presumption and prejudice that we have built, and look to cross divides? Then the third one is about navigating disagreement, knowing that God is with us in conflict and as we face conflict, and if handled well, is there the possibility of strengthened relationship? And then the fourth session is practicing forgiveness. And the last session looks at risking hope, knowing that as we try and become a community or a society or a church or a congregation or a family that look to be bearers of peace, that will be costly, risky, and often resisted. And so how do we go forward risking hope, knowing that it's not necessarily going to be easy, but that we go together? So that gives you a sense of the content really, and the kind of subject matter that difference covers.
Yeah, so in terms of my contribution here, I think I want to start with what we have in our Christian tradition, which is most powerful, which is story. As Christians, we have the story of God being incarnate, coming to earth. Coming into the world. We have the stories that Jesus left us, and we have the stories that have been passed down to us about our Christian siblings through space and time. And so I'll share a couple of stories about how I became involved in this work, and I think how some of these habits showed up. And so I'll start in college, at university, like every good university student, getting involved with activism. I got very passionate about sort of anti-war causes and economic inequality. And I was very much a part of what was at the time the Occupy movement. And I remember at some point we went on a march through the city of Boston, and we finally got into Dewey Square in front of the Federal Reserve Building in Boston. And you know, this is a classic sort of activist standoff. You have all these activists, these protesters with the signs, and they're screaming, and a line of police officers in riot gear, and we're screaming and yelling the sorts of things that only crowds can produce. And at some point, I remember in the midst of this, I looked at, and for some reason my attention was drawn to this one woman, this police officer. And so I kind of yelled out at her in this frenzy, like, so what are you doing here? Like, do you have children? Like, do you care about them? And something dawned on me in that moment. And that was, maybe she does have children. Yeah. Or maybe she has brothers or sisters, maybe a partner. She definitely has parents. All right. And in that moment, I became curious about this person, and I was able then to see her. All right. And when I saw her as a person, not just a police officer who is obstructing our way, but as a human being, as another child of God, and became curious about her story, I was then able to see us, the crowd that I was in, and our faces were not a beautiful sight. Right? The anger and the hatred and the vitriol in that moment directed towards these other human beings. And in that moment, it felt like I kind of came to myself. And so I started to wrestle with, what does it mean to actually seek justice, and seek justice in line with my core identity as a child of God and as a follower of Christ. And this led me back actually to the church to find resources within our church tradition. And I went on a very long journey, a journey that led me to Lambeth Palace, getting involved with reconciliation. That journey led me to Northern Ireland, to Corrymeela Peace and Reconciliation Center. And it also landed me, I think, last summer in the midst of a lot of those protests against police violence, against communities of color. And I was struggling because I had committed for about 10 years to this way of reconciliation and peace building. And I started to ask myself, and I started to ask God, so what do I do? How do I reconcile this within myself? Yeah. As I watch people like me, people in my community consistently be murdered at the hands of both police officers and people who weren't police officers, but who felt empowered to take our lives. And as I was praying this, I love how God answers prayers at a time, because then I got a call from a friend, a mentor actually, who asked me if I wanted to get engaged in protest chaplaincy. And this meant then going to protest and not necessarily trying to partake or tell people what to do, but being a presence in that space, sometimes de-escalating, but most of the time being a witness, being able to hear what people had to say. Sometimes people were involved in a traumatic thing, a traumatic experience. And so we were there and we did all sorts of things. And I remember this particular moment where I was in the midst of this protest and it was chaotic. At some point, the tear gas started to come out. People started to rush lines. The police, this was in Atlanta right after Rayshard Brooks was killed. We were at this Wendy's where he was gunned down in the parking lot. And I saw this young brother engaged in a very tense conversation with a police officer, right? Like state trooper, hand near his gun, he was ready, had his hat on. And I thought, well, that doesn't look like that'll end well. And so I decided to sort of just move over to that space and just stand there as a protest chaplain, as a witness. And the thing that was interesting is, at some point, as they're having this argument back and forth, this brother, this protester, and this police officer, this angry exchange, the police officer looked at me and he looked down here at my cross. And he did this 3 times. I remember this. And by the 3rd time he looked down at my cross, he looked up and he said to the protester, he said, I'm a man of God. And the protester said, well, what does that mean? And he said, that means I believe in the inherent dignity of all people. Yeah. And so this brother said, well, then why are you out here supporting the murder of my people? And they went back and forth and they had this exchange, but and I can't say that this solved police violence, right? Because at some point, but they got to a point where they understood each other. Yeah, the reminder that God was present through my presence, through my witness, changed the conversation that these guys were having, and they walked away. Not necessarily completely agreeing with each other, but they walked away. That brother is still alive and not in handcuffs. And that police officer, I saw in his face, had something to think about, because it ended with this brother asking him, well, why aren't you out here supporting us, right? If you don't think what this police officer did was right. This is just an example then of presence and how presence becomes important to transforming division. And that led me then, when I think about reimagining, to hosting the difference course, actually. And I hosted it last year as a part of a program with the Episcopal Evangelism Society. And I worked with college students and monastics, because I thought to myself, in this space, after this moment with this protester and this police officer, I thought we must have deeper resources. And so I started to look to monastic communities. And so I started to try to bring together monastic communities and young adults. And we did this through the process of the difference course. Yeah. And again, standing in this space of being curious originally, with that woman, that police officer, and then being present with this protester and this police officer, led me to the difference course, to reimagine ways in which we can engage activists, young adults, with monks and nuns, and the course was wonderful, and we'll probably have some time to talk about that a little bit later. Yeah.
Thanks, Demarius. It's so lovely to hear some of that applied nature of it, taking us beyond concept into frozen out. Oh, am I back?
You're back. We were in one of those moments where I was like, is this me or her? I realized, but you're back. Don't worry. Yeah. You're back, Kiera. Well, I'll jump back in and just tell a little bit more about my story of hosting the difference course. And this is where the difference course isn't a very issue-based sort of experience. A part of what it does in looking at these 3 habits of being curious and being present and reimagining is it takes us a few steps back. We get real concerned, I think, about our particular issues of justice, and I think it's important, but we don't talk about how we engage with each other as people. And so when I did the difference course in the last year during this sort of very tense election cycle, and I did it with folks who were of different ages in different places in the US, the experience there was one that it showed me that when we had to work through some of the difficulties of some of those power divides, but the habits themselves helped us work through some of those difficulties. And are you back, Kiera? You're back.
I am, but keep going. Sounds great.
Wonderful. Yeah, well, the habits, I'm just thinking, just talking about how the habits of being curious and being present and reimagining helped us work through, because like I said, we had people in our course who were, different races, different economic statuses, even different religious backgrounds. And so it was difficult at times to navigate those power divides. And people were also stressed and traumatized by what was going on in the environment. And so one of the things that was really beautiful for me was to see how some of the monastics engage with the habits and saying, things like, well, this is very familiar in terms of a Benedictine way of life, for instance, or a Franciscan way of life. And it's very familiar, but also how we were able to return to the habits when there was conflict within our group. But you can take it away. Yeah.
Thanks. So we have got kind of about 15 or so minutes left, and would love to answer any questions. Those could be really practical questions about the course, or those could be broader questions about some of the content that we've talked about and engaged with, and anything that we could say or could help you with. We would be delighted to do our best. So if you do have any questions or anything you'd like to know, just jot that down in the chat, and we'd love to answer it. And then we could talk maybe a little bit more about our experience, like Demarius was, of running it. So Nathan, thank you. You've been our loyal chatterer. So tell us more about the resources available for facilitators. So it's a fantastic question. So we currently, but not for very long, we currently train what we call hosts, who are the facilitators. We chose the word host because it's got that intrinsic nature of hospitality in it. We just really liked that. And then those that come, we call participants, because it's active, we're engaged, we're kind of working and doing and thinking. And the course doesn't really have any teaching material. So you as a host or as a facilitator, you don't need to do teaching. It's much more about sharing story and experience and reflection, as Demarius talked about that power of story. So there's a story element where there's a film of a story in each session, as well as an encounter of Jesus's, to kind of learn and listen and reflect on what we learn about Jesus through his encounters and what we learn from others through their own experiences. So we currently train people on video conference, and I can put the chat in, the link in the chat, which takes you to the part of our website where you sign up for a training event. We have got one left this summer. There is one training event left. I shall put it in for you now. And that's on a Zoom like this, basically, but we can see you all. So it's less of a webinar, it's kind of more of a meeting. And we do breakouts and a sample session and tell you all about the course. And then after that, you are given access to a host dashboard. And on that host dashboard, you have all the resources. You have all the films, you have all the slide decks, you have all the session guides, you have your like step-by-step manual, you have a participants guide, you have promotional material, you have everything you need on that dashboard after you've come to a training event. And part of the reason we do training is because we wanted to make this really accessible. So you don't need to be clergy to run it. You don't need to be a professional mediator. You don't need to be a counsellor. You can be a church member and you're in your small group. And this is a resource that your small group or midweek group could go through, because we want to train and equip anyone who wants to run it well. So at the moment, that training is done face-to-face via a Zoom conference, and you can book onto our final summer event. But come the autumn, that training will be, Demarius and I, in fact, had a very long day. On Monday, we did like a 10-12 hour film day. So hopefully you won't be too tired of our faces. But we've turned that face-to-face training into a film series. So that will go live this autumn. And it's really to make it more accessible for you, so you can access it at any time, anywhere, over your lunch, having a cup of tea, whatever it is that you fancy. But yeah, so it's just much more accessible way to engage with the training material, and that will have then your dashboard with all the materials and resources on it. So I hope that was clear. If it's not, ping us a question. Oh yeah, look, you've just told us that our final training day is midnight. That's a great point. So if September is looking too late for you, Scott, drop us a note at hello@rln.org. You can just find that on the website, and we could maybe chat to you about how to do that. Cost, thank you, Kathleen. So there's no cost for the training, and if you want to download the materials, they are also free. So that's partly this sense of, I think we feel like what we've created, we hope to just offer as a gift, and if that is something that is resonating and working, then we're really happy for that. We know that the people's contexts are so varied, and we just did this quite big international review last year. We had a lot of people from the US as part of our pilot cohort. So that was, we worked with like 15 different countries, testing the material and hearing back feedback, and then have just gone through a big process of incorporating all of that feedback from the international review to really strengthen it, and to hear from different places in different contexts, that just has meant the material has just been really strengthened through a bit more of that kind of global family and engagement. Great. Language can be a very important component of our communication. The question is, how do we learn the language that will limit defensive reactions and facilitate the communication that is desired? Demarius, can you have a little think about that question? And I'm just going to answer a little couple practical ones, and we could come back to it. I think I like, in terms of language, just even to say a little bit about where we've come from with some of the language that we're leaning into, like we call it difference rather than a course on reconciliation. I think reconciliation, especially thinking, well, in the UK, it's probably a slightly lofty word for a lot of kind of normal churchgoers. It might not resonate too deeply what that means. And in other places that we've spoken to, it's a highly politicized word, or there has been reconciliation processes. So there's depth and history, and there's a lot that comes with some of that language. And so that's why we've tried to create some of this language. It's quite accessible for people. The difference course, I would say, is really aimed at your ordinary churchgoer. So a churchgoer that isn't necessarily, at university studying international conflict or peace and mediation. There's a lot of depth there that people can explore, but it's trying to really help a wide audience engage with these issues and equip us in our everyday context and equip people in their everyday relationships. So the language that we've tried to use is some of that. We've tried to be quite straightforward and descriptive in our meaning. So that gives you a little sense of some of that. A recommended maximum group size. So I'd say if you're doing a minimum, there's an online version and there is an in-person physical version, because there's got different kind of instructions for how you do that, especially around the activities. I would recommend 8 is, you don't necessarily want to go smaller than 8. You could go to 3, but the kind of interactive elements of the dynamic, 8 is a good baseline. And then we would suggest, when you get beyond 30 people, bring in a volunteer, bring in a helper for every extra 20 people that come. We really recommend running it with a host, so you're not running it by yourself. And then if you're beyond 30, pull in a volunteer, a helper that can just help people understand what the small group question is if they've forgotten what it is, or it's just to be on hand. We've had groups of like 250 run it in kind of different places, so from 8+ really. Demarius, shall I go to you to think about that question on language?
Yeah, so the first thing that came to mind was the reading from today. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble of heart, and you will find rest, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And I think that idea that we are a part of Jesus' movement is important here. It's important to ask, how does Jesus engage folks? I mean, this is a part of what the Difference course does, is it tries to look in a lot of ways, how does Jesus show up in the midst of division? And a lot of times there are questions, right? And there's a lot of listening. If you actually look in the Bible, Jesus does not speak actually as much as we think. He does. He does a lot of listening. and ask a lot of questions. And so I think in terms of language, we have to start thinking about, what does it mean to listen? What does it mean for us to use less language? What does it mean for us to not be trying to advance an agenda, to create space where people feel open and welcome to show up? Because I think then things can happen. But the defensiveness comes in because human beings, we are quite a clever creature, and we know when someone is attempting to impose their will on us. And I think this is why Jesus says that it's, my yoke is easy and my burden is light, because Jesus is just inviting. It's just invitation.
Thank you. It's probably just like a couple of other points to kind of raise, and then if there's no other questions, then we'll kind of close in a couple of minutes. But it's helpful to give the context of difference is that it is not issue-based. So it doesn't have a session on climate justice or dismantling racism or gender inequality. It isn't issue-based, but is more about giving people a framework to engage with the pertinent issue at hand. And so it is aimed, and you know, we really hope those issues are brought into the course, and they may vary from community to community, country to country, like small group to small group. So there's a lot of opening to engage with issues, but then it's not particularly issue-based, like not each session. The church that I am part of has been going on a listening for a change process for the last year, which has been about dismantling racism within our own congregation. And so, you know, they've chosen to do the difference course within that process as something that's giving people shared language. It's giving us tools. It's giving us a framework. It's equipping us to think about, actually, how can I listen to the stories of others? How can I be really present here? And maybe what is God doing in us as a congregation and helping us reimagine something that is far more representative of his kingdom than what we currently are. So, and churches are engaging with it, sometimes bringing in an issue in particular, and sometimes not. Like, people are processing it and thinking about their own stuff, a workplace scenario, a family scenario, a friendship that you know, is disconnected. So there's lots of different levels that people can engage with the actual content and material of the course on. Demarius, is there anything else, any other kind of top tips, any takeaways for us as we draw into close?
I think one of the things that comes to mind is I talked with a peace builder recently, or Sarah, and when she came to visit VTS last year, and we talked about the sort of American landscape and division, and I asked her, what did she think? You know, Sarah has been around the world in all of these different conflict zones, and she spends all her time thinking about peace building. And she said something like, you know, I've been in all these places. She said, I've been in places where folks will machete each other to death, you know. And she said, but I'm particularly afraid in this place. There's something going on in this place. And I said, well, what's one of the suggestions you have for us? And she said, well, I think Americans are very good at hosting people. She said Americans are not very good at being hosted, accepting the hospitality of others. And so I think hospitality becomes very, very important for us in this course. What does it mean to host well for you, but also to recognize that if people show up, they are inviting you into their world, into their stories. And how can we learn how to live in other people's stories? And I know that that's actually quite difficult. And as a person who is very concerned with issues of justice, as a person who, you know, walks through the streets of Atlanta sometimes and feels like my life is on the line with some of these questions, I know it's difficult. But I think thinking about what does it mean to be a host, but also what does it mean to be hosted becomes very important for us. And this course, I think, will help us in a number of ways. It won't solve the issue, but it helps get us to a place where maybe we can be in the same room, and then maybe we can start to solve the issue.
Thanks, Demarius. Well, I think we should bring this lovely time to a close. We have really, really loved this. It's been like, I just totally love the chat. Sometimes I'm not quite like been able to keep up with it. But thank you so much. If you have any further questions, I have learned how to do this correctly now to everybody, not just to my panelists. So feel free to drop me a note. We're at hello@rln.org. If you've got any questions or are super keen and want to connect in before September, but don't fancy a midnight training session, do drop us a note. We'd totally love that. And thank you so much for your time in the middle of your afternoon to engage with us. Demarius, maybe you will give us a kind of peace and blessing as we close.
Let us pray. Spirit of the living God, fall fresh on us and make us new. Give us the insight, the courage, the vision to follow you. Give us the strength to love you even when it's difficult. In your name we pray. Amen.
Thank you so much, everyone. Peace and grace.